So my assignment, as I have it, we're going to create a service, right, that returns various data from the database. And when I say that database, most not a tracker database, right? Sample code is from the book review, and this is from the show tracker. So we would want to be able to return all the venues, and I'm saying you just have to return the names of the venues. You don't have to return all the information about them. These would be for like drop-down lists. This would be like for one piece of your thing where you're just displaying stuff. And then another piece, which I'm not sure we'll fully develop, would be where you could click on it and get all the information, you know, and things. But for right now, just a method to return all the venues, one to return all the artists, all the shows. And again, you can just return the names. I'm not asking you to return the whole thing. That's a little more complicated, so that's why I'm limiting it just so you can just return a string, basically. For the shows, we will do maybe like you might want to do like a data thing for the show, because it return a little bit of information about a show based on, right? So if you choose a venue, you can get the shows for that venue. If you choose an artist, let's do that artist. So that's the thing, to create this service and then just test it. So let's set up WordPad for my whiteboard, basically. What are the steps that you would need to do this? First of all, just the general steps. How would you start? What, go ahead. You actually, before you do any of that, so I'm just thinking, new empty website. All right, so we almost always will start with an empty website. Now there are templates there. There is a WCF template, and there's other templates that you could use. I suggest always, I mean, explore them on your own for sure. But in general, it's better to start with an empty one if you're trying to learn it, because if you start with one of the templates, you're suddenly given a whole bunch of code that you have to adapt. And that's harder than writing it from scratch. All right, so you talked about the SQL and stuff, but we're talking about doing kind of like what we did in class, and I'm going to review that in a moment too. Once you've got the new empty website, you probably want to run that ADO entities, right, wizard. What does that do? Do you guys remember? It actually, so this does the database connection, right? Which is nice because you do not have to go into the config file and write it, because it will for you. Okay. If you want to go look at the config file and see what it wrote, it's a little bit more, quite a bit more complicated than what we wrote, because it actually puts a attribute for every variable, which you don't need them all, but you know, it puts it all there. So it connects to the database. The other thing it does is we need to list what tables we would need. What tables do you think? I know you're not real familiar with this, but just to get the idea, I just want to talk you through this one.
Oh, the artist.
Yeah, so if you want to return the artist, you need the artist table. We were going to return the venue, so you need the venue table, right? We need show, and this is a little bit confusing, so I think I do want to do this. You want the show detail too. So the show is broken up into show and show detail, and the confusing thing is that the artist isn't associated with the show, it's associated with the show detail, because one show could have multiple artists, right? So the idea is that there's the show detail tells which artists are in the show. It may only be one. I think actually for most of what is in there, there's not a lot of data in there. Most of it is one artist, but there are some that have more than one artist. I was thinking when I designed this originally, something like Bumbershoot, where you could have dozens or hundreds of artists, right? Yeah.
So I'm sorry, Miss, what is different between show and show detail?
So show is, it's kind of like, show is the general thing. What is the date of the show?
General things.
What is the venue of the show? You know, where's it showing? The time, the basic time of the show. The show detail is who is the artist, and also if there's multiple artists, what order will they be in? So what times do the individual artists show? I'm not going to ask you to do a bunch with that right now, but I just want to know that if you want to do a connection to the artist, you'll have to have the show detail table on. I'll show you a little bit how in the code that we already did, because I'm not going to, but I will analyze what we did and try to make it clear in your head what was going on. Is there any other tables that were just this, just returning stuff? If we look back at the assignment, so we wanted to list all the venues, artists, shows for a venue, and the venue is an artist, and the artist is linked to the show detail. I think that may be all the tables that we need, but you can always add all the tables if you want. I'm not entirely sure, and this is something that there are articles out there about optimizing these things. I'm not entirely sure if that adds a lot of overhead to have extra tables that you're not using. It may not, but it may. I need to research that. So does that make sense? You run the ADO wizard, you get and you add the least of these tables. Yeah.
Each time you start the Visual Studio, you have to make that database connection, but it's not automatic.
So, you know, the database connection that we made over in the side, that's utterly irrelevant to the program. The only thing is it lets you see the database while you're working. Should, you know, I am not entirely sure. Sometimes it stays there, and sometimes it goes away.
Yeah.
So if it goes away, you can always add it just by doing new database connection, and then that dialog screen, which you'll know by heart by the end of this quarter, where you connect to the database. And it isn't a bad idea to do the connection. It just, again, it lets you see the database without having to go out to SQL Server to see it. And you didn't make the database, so you don't know the fields that well and stuff. So I'll show you. I'll do that again too when we get there. Okay, so after you've got this, a couple of things again that I mentioned last time with this ADO entities wizard. If it screws up, it's easier to delete everything and do it over again than it is to fix it. All right, it is fixable, but it could take hours to fix, and it takes seconds to rerun it. So if it doesn't work, then just delete it and run it again. The other thing, trying to think of any other issues with you. I don't turn off, some of you may, or it has that little thing where it gives you all these warnings about may not be safe. There's a little checkbox that says you can not show that warning again, but I don't check that because the warnings are a really good sign that it's working. Right? If you don't get the warnings, it probably didn't work. So if you turn those things off, it's less annoying, but it also doesn't give you that last clue that it's working. Questions on those? And again, if you want, again, that document, that PDF document goes through the ADO entities for the book review one, step by step, screen by screen. Yeah.
So what did you say was delete
the whole, if the ADO entities thing doesn't work. One reason I do it first is it's going to put it in an app code folder. You could just delete the whole app code folder. And they all say entities. I'll show you when we get into the code. What?
How do you know it doesn't work?
Because you can't connect, you can't get anything.
Okay, I only ask because sometimes you don't.
Yeah. Well, so this part though, if you're doing this, so far we have a new empty website. You've done this. You shouldn't have any code you wrote. Yeah. right? So no code yet. You just run this. Everything's clean. Generally, it'll throw errors. Another good sign that it's working is when you get the screen with all the tables on it, and usually they have the relations. Kind of like that, yeah.
Does it ask you which tables you want to add, or do you have them manual?
It asks you which ones you want to add. In the screen, do you remember where you go and it has that things to add? There's a screen where you have to click to expand it, and then it'll show you all the tables that are
Okay.
available.
Oh, yeah.
So those are the two things I would start with. What would you do after these?
Save it.
What?
Save it.
Save it. That's actually a good idea. For a couple of reasons. One is that it doesn't always recognize that the ADO entities has run successfully if you don't save. Right? So if you save it, then it'll show up in your IntelliSense. Actually, I'll show you another in a moment, place where you can tell if it's not working. It usually works, but always there's one or two where it doesn't work. All right. So the next thing I would do inside this new empty website, anybody have a clue what to do next? So we've got the ADO entities, we've saved it. So you would service, right? And you can do this through the website window menu or through right-clicking on the project, and you want to add new. This might even show up in the list at that point, but if it doesn't show up, you can do add new item, and it'll give you the dialog box. It always adds, so name it. If you don't name it, and do files, it should give you whatever you named it, service. But again, you should name it. And it should give you iService.cs and just service.cs. Does that make sense? I will post this too on the blog. What we're doing here, maybe with some more comments. It's actually also going to give you another file. These two should be in the app code folder. It will give you another file that says service.srv. Okay, that one you can ignore, but don't get rid of it. It's a XML file that has some of the, not the web config stuff, but some of the config stuff for your service. So there'll be those three files with whatever you name your service, right? So if you named your service select service or something, then this would be I select service, select service, select service. Right, whatever you name it. Okay, what now? What do you guys remember? I know it's been a whole day or two. And it was a lot that we did last time. Have any idea? And this is a pattern that we're going to follow with the services, right? We're going to follow them. And I'm going to look at the actual service and talk about some bits of it in a moment too. But I'm hoping to give you guys an hour to get started. I don't expect you to finish this today.
Update definition.
What?
Data definition.
Well, so basically what we want to do is set up the interface. So let me pull up what we did last time. So the interface part will have the I in front of it. So here it's the I author book service. I'm just going to open that. I'm going to make this a little smaller too so that I can move it. Okay. So actually, I've told you all of these things where it says book review model, all of those things are the parts that you would delete if you had to delete it. Pretty much you'd want to delete everything except your services. But ideally, you would do that before you add your services. I think in the tutorial, I added the services first. It doesn't really matter which one you add first, but there is certain logic to doing the ADO first so that if it screws up, you can get rid of it. So this is what the interface looks like. Everything has an operation contract, right? And the IntelliSense, let the IntelliSense help you. Right? If you make a square bracket and write in O, you're going to see operation contract in a list. You know, go with it. Down here, this list object, and I would suggest that for all of the ones that are returning just a name, right? Just the name of the show, the name of the artist, the name of the venue. You'd probably want to use this list object with string. And the advantage of using that over an array is that you don't have to say how big it is, right? You can add as many as there are. Otherwise, you have to do a test after you do your query to figure out how big it is, how many are in the response, and then add, do it in an array. This is much easier. And you just name what you're going to do, and ideally, you should name it something that makes sense. So I just called it get authors. You'll have, instead of get authors, you'll have get artists, right? So it'll be exactly that same structure. Does that structure make sense to you? Just setting up a method signature. The signature for a method is just what does it return and the name of it. Also, for some of them, what parameters does it take? So this one is going to return books, right? And it's going to, I'll show you the thing in a moment. We made our own class called Book Light. It's just a little bit different than the actual book class. And sometimes it's easier to manage your own, make your own class, because you don't need everything that's in the database class, or you need to combine things from two tables. It's easier to make your own class sometimes. It takes an author as an argument. That means that there will be a string called an author, and I will return a list of books for that author. Does that make sense? So we're passing in the name of an author, and then we're getting that. That's what the interface is, basically. Now, you might want a data contract for the show. Remember I said to return those fields from the show? The show is, you could use the show and the show detail classes, but it's easier sometimes to make your own that has the bits from the show and the show detail. And I can help you with this, all right? So in the data contract, you're basically creating a little class. Again, you're not giving it a lot of content, but you're setting up the properties. So we have a title, ISBN, entry date here. And each one gets a set and get, and then you have to say what type of data it is, and it needs to be public. And they also need to be data members. Otherwise, you can't see them. What?
Those have to match the database, right?
They don't. Actually, these don't have to match the database at all, although it might be easier if they do.
Okay.
So this is our own class.
Okay.
In fact, when I show you this, you might know, in the database, it's book title, book ISBN, book entry date.
Okay.
And this in the database is a date time, and I turned it into a string because it's easier to handle as a string in web forms and things. Okay, so those two things. And so what kinds of, let's go back to here. What methods are you going to need? just to think about it now. So we want to return artists, right? I'll do the first one. So you might do a list string get artist. Okay, so that's what that would look like. What other things are you going to need?
You scroll up this.
Actually, it won't let me. Let me see.
Scroll it.
What else would you need?
New show.
Yeah, so we were going to do get shows just by name, right? Get venues. And you could say get artists, I guess, if we're going to be consistent. Now, if you make your own object, you could do, I'm going to call it show light. You'd have to return one at a time. Get show by venue, string. That, right? Sense could you have got there, I guess. I'm not going to talk to it. It's hard when you don't know what to do. And I'm and the names here are not magic. You can name them whatever you want, right? And they have to match the field in the database. It's a variable name.
Doesn't have to match.
You don't have to match. Everything. This the names of these variables is just up to you. Just you should name them something that makes sense. Part of documenting when you're coding is naming things something in a way that you can tell what they are by their name. A lot of the really abbreviated naming came was really tight. So it's generally, if you were coding for what would, even phones have a lot of RAM these days. I don't know how much RAM Dash would have. Dashboard in a car, yeah.
It's a whole lot of RAM. Bundle of unnecessary.
Yeah. Where a lot of these days is, and even apps that they're building it into devices. And weirdly, a lot of that's done in Java. And I do consider that weird because it's not the most efficient language to do it in. You guys kind of come up to do a little of that. I mean, let's go back here. So when I did Booklight, I needed the title, the ISBN, and the entry date. If we go to the assignment, it says that we really should bring back for the show we want the show name, the show date, and the show start time. So that's really all we need to bring back, right? So those could be your classes or your fields in your class. All right. So I want to show you a couple of other things. So this is the interface. And again, the interface is sent to the client. We haven't created the client yet. That's the next assignment. But the client is a lot easier on all of these. All the coding gets done in the service pretty much. The client just has to call it and show the results. And again, the reason you do all the coding in the service is that it talks to the database, but the client, all it knows is the service. It never gets a direct talk to the database. Okay, so these are the interface. And interfaces are not something unique to services. As I said, they are everywhere in object-oriented programming. There are millions of interfaces, and you can make your own like we are here. It's a key component of object-oriented programming. So I'm going to go back to the actual service. And part of what I want to do is talk through these queries, because they're probably a bit weird to you. And I'm going to actually take a snippet of it, because then I can draw on it. Okay. So, do you guys have any, I mean, just general questions off the top of your head when you look at something like that? Yeah.
Actually, I had a question about show light.
Yeah.
He wants to list all the shows for a particular venue.
Right.
With all those things that would populate the show light.
Yeah.
And then he wants to list all the shows for a particular artist.
Right.
Does that just go through the same?
It's a fairly same show light.
Same show light.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to make two of them. Yeah. So this is somewhat like SQL. So if you know SQL, this is like an upside down SQL statement. Okay. The var, and you generally want to do a var when you're doing this kind of query. I'll show you later how to insert stuff and update stuff, which is actually amazingly easy compared to the SQL. But the var is a variable that will store whatever comes in. So it doesn't have a set type, right? It'll get its type once it figures out what kind of data it's getting. And it's probably a complex type.
I'm confused by the A a little bit.
Right, so that was one of the things I was gonna, so this is just a variable. It could be anything you want. I called it A because I'm talking about authors. I would not write it out as a big long word just because you have to do a lot of dot notation. It's a pain to type it. But it can be literally anything. It could be X, Y, Z, Chester, Roger, whatever you want to name it. It is just a variable. But you're right, it isn't made a variable the way we usually make a variable.
I don't know really where it gets like about her.
The value that it gets is it's for, this is kind of like a for each loop.
Okay.
So for each var A in authors, so it's basically going to store that object, the author object, in BR authors. And the BR comes from here. Book review DB entities, BR equals new book review DB entities. That ties us to all of this stuff. Now, here's one of the times when you know it didn't work, if you can't find an entities. For yours, it'll be show tracker entities. If there's no show tracker entities anywhere in the IntelliSense, then this probably didn't work. But so that show tracker entities, so that BR, part of what the BR contains, again, is a class definition for every table that you drug onto that designer. And so when I do BR authors, that's the author table. Now here's another little weirdness. It pluralizes. It puts a S. So the actual table name is author. But the class, in order to keep it distinct, it adds an S to it. If you named your class with an S, then this would be authors 1. It would put a 1 on it. Does that make sense? It has to distinguish, however slightly, from the class versus the table.
I'm a little confused by the select. Why are there curly?
I'm not entirely sure why it uses curly braces there.
Just part of it.
Yeah. The select always comes last, though.
All right.
And there are, if you go online and you look, so we start with from. And again, as I said, SQL actually works that way too. First thing it does is it locates the table, and that's what this is doing. And then the A is just a variable that's storing all of the rows, basically, each in the table. Each row is stored in A. Does that make sense? So we can order by, notice A.author name. And again, use the IntelliSense. What I do here, if I do A dot, it shows me author key, author name. It also will give me a list of the books that are associated with this author. That'll actually be as an array. And then it has all the stuff that goes with every class in C#, equals, get hash code, get type, etc. But the IntelliSense you're doing, and then all I wanted to return was the author name. For some reason, I've seen syntax where you don't have to use select new, where you can just, if you're only selecting one field, you can just select it. But this, it never works for me, so I do select new. And then the curly braces, A.author name. And if you're doing multiple fields, you just do A.author name, comma, A.author, I forget what the other one, key. There wasn't a whole lot in author, but you know, you could do. So this syntax, it looks scary, but it's really not too scary. And the IntelliSense will try to help you. You don't have to break the lines. I did that just to make it more readable. And to me, it makes sense to break it. Order by, right? That's just going to list it in alphabetical order. You could also do it as descending and things like that. You don't have to order it by. And you know, then the select new. There's other things you can do. I'll show you the other statement in a moment. Does that sort of make sense?
Why in the 40s would you need
And you can try it. Because I have seen the syntax where you do that, where you turn offs, and then at the other side, you do offs to list. But
I mean, I'd rather do it.
well, so that should work, and I don't know what it is, and I haven't figured out why this always works. So, also, if you, which is okay, but I have I don't know. It doesn't always work for me when I do that. If I do auths here, there is, just to show you the IntelliSense again, one of the things you can do is to list. And basically it turns it into a generic list. But it doesn't, as I said, it doesn't always work on the client side. I'm not sure why.
Is there a lot of stuff like that?
Well, there isn't. If some of it's my own. This is huge, right? There's the description of this language, which is called Link, and is applied to ADO data entities and other things. It's like 70 pages of fairly. I mean, that's just the documentation for it. So, and I don't use. I mean, there are things I do a lot, and then there's a lot of it that I don't do hardly ever. So. And as I said, I don't want to do something that might fail half the time. because I'm not sure.
Mail it back to that.
Yeah. So theoretically, you should be able to return auth.to list. But as I said, it doesn't always work. But you're free to try it, and if it works, great. It's a little bit more efficient that way. This one, what we're doing is we've created our list. We're looping through our authors, and we're adding the author name to that list one at a time, just basically going through.
Where you have the var AU, is AU just basically represent a single author?
Right, so AU is the same thing as A. It's just a variable to represent authors. I often use A again, but I didn't want to do it then because I didn't want you to get confused between these two because they're actually separate variables. They're in different scopes. So A can't be seen after this semicolon. So if I used A again, it would be brand new variable as far as the program was concerned. But I thought that would be confusing. Does that make sense? And then I return the list. And again, if we run this, and you can test this, and I would advise you to do these one at a time and test them. One at a time, because when you move on, it's always good to know that everything is working up to the point where you're doing the next thing. And if the next thing fails, what?
Pretty much just, it should be very easy to set up the other.
Yeah, actually the others are going to be almost cut and paste and change the names.
Yeah.
Right.
Whatever it was, I don't get that.
All right. So to get this pop-up, you need to have your cursor in the service. Right, not in, so it has to be in the service things. What do you get? Which says that it's yeah, forbidden. So you're on the wrong screen somehow.
Oh, I see.
You just did it.
So basically what you do is this comes up, you double click to get authors, then you do invoke, and then it shows you these things over here, right, the names of the authors. I'll look real quick where you are on your screen. But it's very persuasive. You have to be in the right place. Is that your service? Yeah. Yeah, just running. So you only want that now. I'll look at that in a moment. But anyway, so this is a good test to see if it works. I want to show you the other query because it's important because you'll need to do a couple like it also. It's a little bit different. So, oops. I'm just going to, so I can draw on it if I want. All right. Same kind of thing from books, from B and BR books, right? And the B is just a random variable. It's not totally random. It makes sense that B would relate to books. And the BR again relates to that entities, the book review data entities. Now, notice I have a second from though, and you might have to do this. You probably have to do this from author to get your artist. Because again, remember the shows are in artist detail. The thing that's important is notice the B here and the B here. So these two are related. I want the author's A, so I come up with a brand new variable that is related to this particular book, right? To the B. The B ties it together. If I did another BR authors here, it would not complain, but your results would be meaningless. It's the relationship from this variable to this variable. So all the authors that we get into this are being stored in this variable, which relates actually to just like one row at this moment.
So how would we, if we're gonna have to set this up?
So you would do like shows, and then you would probably need to do from, I don't know, SD and show details. And then when you get to show details, if you have the SD, notice that this A down here, A dot author name. So we're looking at books, but I'm getting to the author name. And it equals the author that's being passed in as a parameter, right? So this A is the important thing is that this A is related to the B. You know, it's not just a separate thing. And what it does when you do this, it gives you access to the two, and it understands, because of this, it understands that you want related values. So it understands the relationship between the tables. Here it's a little bit different, but it still should, the syntax should be the same. This is actually a linking table. And in yours, it's actually more of a, what they call a weak entity. Not that that matters a lot. But it's they're two related tables, but they're not, there's no linking table between them. But you can have multiple froms. To see, we're doing this for the author,
Right.
but we're only showing the title, the ISBN, and the entry date. And that's kind of what you would do for the show. I would have you show the author, but it's a little bit complicated because there could be multiple, I mean artists, there could be multiple artists for a show. And the syntax is a little more complex. We will get there, but not now. Because you're dealing with arrays and collections at that point. So this is very close to what you're, you know, for the two queries where you have a parameter passed in, it would be very much like this. Does that make sense? Sorta? I think that's really all you need to know to go. I don't expect you to go get this done today, although some of you may. I also don't expect it to go perfectly smoothly. And the thing when you're doing something new and a little bit complicated like this, don't be afraid to have some stalls. They're okay. You know, it's part of the process. It took me a long time to get through this stuff. And the reason I'm trying to show you this is that this is actually sort of the way that web design is, development is moving. It's towards service-based architecture. It's not always written in C#. You can do all the same stuff in PHP or Java. Or Python, probably. So, but it's sort of the way it's going. And so, and I'm more interested in getting the concepts and stuff across. I will put this on the blog. This has been video. There should be a video of this too. And you can get started. And as I said, you know, don't, I guess like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, don't panic. So I'll just do, as I said, I'll put this into the part I didn't do is in the next part after that. 4 or 5, build the service. Oh, one other thing I'll show you before I go out of there. When you go to the service here, so you need to make the connection, right? The other thing is this iAuthor book service, I'm going to add, you guys don't need to do this, but I'm going to go to the interface. I'm going to add one more method. I am going to just add a separation contract. And I'm just going to say void what they originally had, void do stuff. Okay. So when I go back to the book service, because if you're moving back and forth, newer versions, you'll have errors there. But what it is that the interface isn't the same now as the service. So if you can get that little smart tag, you can do implement interface, and it'll add the do stuff and make sure that they're the same. You can also just type it in, but it's crucial that the methods in the service be exactly the same signature as the methods in the interface. They have to match each other. Does that make sense? Because the interface is a description of this file. So that it has to be an accurate description. They have to match. So you can always, if you click into the iAuthor book service, now in some of the newer ones it's a little more complicated. I don't get a smart tag now because they're in sync. But if they're not in sync, you can resync them. Or as I said, you can always just type it in, but you have to type it exactly the way it was. You do not have to do this. You don't. If you type it in, you don't have to write throw new unimplemented, not implemented option. So I'm going to delete that. And when I delete that, I have to also delete it here, or we will have issues. All right, so I am going to post that. I will post the video, and I will help. Let me stop the video first.